Hi everyone, this is Dr. Pamela Gay, and you are watching the weekly Science Hour hosted by Cosmic Quest. Each week, either I or my co-host Emily Lakdawala, who does alternating weeks, will work to bring you a one-hour discussion with someone deeply engaged in science, either as a communicator, an educator, or as a scientist, and help give you insight on something that we think will be interesting to you. This week, I'm really proud of the discussion I think we're going to get to have. I have with me Andrew Chaikin. He is a noted science historian, author, science journalist. I think he's probably best known for being the man behind the book Man on the Moon, which inspired the From Earth to the Moon miniseries. In addition to that, he's worked with a bunch of different NASA folks helping us guide how we communicate science, and he's also gotten to do some really neat essays for the National Public Radio and just a whole variety of stuff. Time Magazine, you name it, you can probably find him somewhere in their archives. And you can find him online at andrewchaikin.com. That's Chaikin, C-H-I-K-I-N, and we will be linking to that. If you have questions at any time, feel free to leave questions in the comments. We are monitoring the Google Plus feed, the YouTube feed, and Twitter with the hashtag #CQX. So again, that's Andrew Chaikin, C-H-A-I-K-I-N .com. And with me here, thank you so much for being with me, Andrew.
My pleasure. Nice to be with you.
So this week's topic was actually inspired by a somewhat sad incident. We lost author Ray Bradbury last week, and at the age of 91, I think it's fair to say he lived a long and really good life as a writer and philosopher. And I know that his early science writing really brought home to me how far our understanding of our solar system has come. And he was one of your influences, wasn't he?
Yes, but not because I read science fiction. That, of course, was his main claim to fame. You know, he was the author of the Martian Chronicles and books like Fahrenheit 451,
yeah,
and numerous short stories and even poems. And actually, what inspired me was when I was in high school, I came across a book called Mars in the Mind of Man. And this was a transcription of a symposium that had been held at Caltech the day before the Mariner 9 spacecraft became the first mission to orbit Mars.
Yeah. And
really, for the very first time, unveil that planet as an absolute geologic wonderland. And Ray was one of the panelists, along with Carl Sagan and a geologist named Bruce Murray, and, of course, the great science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke. And in that discussion, which was really about the hold that Mars has on our imaginations and always has,
yeah,
Ray really blew it out of the park. I mean, he spoke with such an amazing, soaring passion that it was impossible not to be swept along by it. He even read one of his poems, which became an immediate touchstone for me about the why of space, why we feel compelled to, as I said in my NPR piece, always strive for the next hill, even if that hill is another planet or another star. And I really feel that Ray has been the beacon that has best guided us, best really exemplified the passion that drives us to leave our home planet and try and become a multi-planet and even a multistellar species.
And one of the things that really amazes me about looking back at his stuff is when he started writing, it was before Mariner 2 had launched, before that first 50 years ago this summer successful mission to another planet. And prior to Mariner 2, the only way we'd been able to explore other planets was in reflected sunlight. And with Mariner 2, for the first time, we got a temperature of another planet. And we found out Venus was not habitable. In fact, it's just way too hot. But up until then, with the Martian Chronicles and so many other science fiction stories, there is this vision of Mars and Venus being places that like humans could walk around, no big deal, tropical paradises. And in the past 50 years, we've realized that our solar system is both much less habitable than initially thought, but maybe more habitable than temporarily feared. And NASA's been desperately looking for where's the water. And that's where we are today. And you've had the chance to document in a lot of your writing this amazing epic tale of exploration and then slowed exploration. And I'd love to hear what's your perspective on how we've gone from the Apollo era, which you've got to spend a lot of your time studying, to today's modern space exploration programs.
You know, to coin a phrase, it's been a long, strange trip, and it's continuing. But I think it's continuing in a context that we never would have imagined back in the early days that you just described. You know, 50 years ago, space exploration was really a matter of national prestige and even national security in a way, because we were in the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and space was the new battleground of that Cold War. So the reason that we went to the moon when we did with Project Apollo was because it was a proxy for a shooting war. Okay, we got to have a battle with the Soviet Union without ever firing a shot. Yeah. And it was waged in terms of technology, and it was waged in terms of industry and ingenuity and the sheer determination of a free society to show what it could do. So what that did, though, was it got things terribly out of sequence. It's really messed up the storyline for those of us who have been in love with this stuff for a long time, because the way it was supposed to happen was that we were supposed to build up the technology to put people in space, and then we were supposed to establish a permanent foothold in space and then make our way out to the moon and the planets. Well, Apollo threw everything into a cocked hat. And one of the moonwalkers, Gene Cernan, likes to say that it's as if John Kennedy grabbed a decade out of the 21st century and spliced it into the 1960s. The problem was that by the time we got to the moon, the whole political climate had changed. Yeah. And the fact that we beat the Russians to the moon took the entire political wind out of the sails of NASA. And so ever since then, the space program has been searching for a purpose that would connect with the public, connect with the lawmakers who fund it. And the shuttle was supposed to lower the cost of access to Earth orbit. Well, it didn't do that. No. The space station, they never really did figure out what it was supposed to be. They just said, let us build it and there'll be all kinds of cool things. Meanwhile, the planetary program, who have been the real explorers, the robotic missions who've gone beyond Earth orbit after humans stopped going to the moon, they've been the real explorers, and they've been going through a budgetary roller coaster for decades, and now we're back in a down period where the planetary program is really kind of on the ropes. And I'd like people who are listening in to realize that this is actually a pretty dire time. And if we love what's been happening with the Mars rovers and the Cassini orbiter going around Saturn and sending back those incredible images of Saturn and its rings and its moons, you know, the moon Enceladus, which has geysers from its south pole that may be an indication of a habitable environment under its icy shell, things like that. If you want this stuff to keep happening, let Congress know that you feel that way, because we've got to get out, we've got to reach out above the noise of this current economic state and let people who make decisions know that we still need to explore even in these tough times. But I think as I look at this time period, and of course Ray Bradbury's death plunged me into a deep reflection, even deeper than I had been, I still feel that there is something that you can't stop in us, and Ray exemplified it. It's this incredible luminous spirit that we have to just transcend our limits. And that is what space exploration is about. It's also, by the way, it's about gaining new awareness, because we don't know what we're going to find. We don't anticipate, we can't possibly anticipate the way we will feel when we look back at the Earth from 200,000 miles away, as the Apollo astronauts did, or when we get to Mars a couple 100 million miles away, when it's just a bright star in the sky. I want to know what that feels like, and there's no way a robot can do that.
Yeah. And
right?
And I think one of the interesting things that's been coming out of the recent dialogue is when you look back at the 1960s, you have this period of humans building giant things. You have the Apollo era where we went to the moon. You have the first nuclear reactors being built. You have giant land programs. You have so many things where humanity is basically coming together and building large structures, large technologies, changing everything, dreaming everything. And we haven't really had any of these giant perspective and reality-changing things since then. And I know this is something that Neil Stephenson, another science writer and science fiction writer and computer science, I guess, cyber fiction writer, has been talking about, is reflected in modern science fiction, and you see this in movies as well as in books. There's a lot of this, oh my God, the horrors of this science fiction, where you see the diseases, you see the hackers, you see all these bad things. It's no longer Gene Roddenberry's happy future where we have no poverty and no religious crisis. It's instead everything is in crisis. Everything is post-apocalyptic. How do we get general society back to the big dreaming again? This is one of the struggles.
Well, I think that there is an assumption that's implicit in Neil Stephenson's piece, and I think also in your question. And the assumption is that we ought to know what the storyline is, that we ought to know what the narrative is for humanity. And I think what the last many decades has shown us is that the narrative keeps shape-shifting on us and is so elusive that we really are misguided if we think we can predict it. And I think the best we can do is to try and be as creative and nimble as we can be in response to the shifting landscape of our ever-changing world, to coin a very cliched phrase. You know, there were science fiction writers who predicted the world that we have now, a world in which resources are becoming scarce, more and more scarce, a world in which complexity threatens to overwhelm us, a world in which technology melds with organic life to produce an entirely new kind of human. I think we're seeing that, the first stirrings of that, as the internet and video games and all the other information streams rewire us, really.
Yeah.
And of course, for people like me who grew up in the 60s and 70s, it seems a little bit frightening to think about that. But although I shouldn't speak for my generation, I'm just saying for me, it seems a little bit unsettling at times. But I don't think we can know what the ultimate effects are. It's very much, it's very much the kind of Buddhist precept of could be good, could be bad, And I think one of the things that I hold on to is the power of humans to reinvent themselves and to reinvent society. And that's a wonderful creative force that we have to nurture, and we have to advocate for it. I think Neil Stephenson made a very good point on the fact that the corporatization of the world is a force that acts against that kind of creativity, that kind of small-scale, fertile flowering of ideas and new ways of doing things, because corporations don't really like change. And they don't certainly want change that will upset their bottom line. And Neil makes that point in his story that, you know, if a manager is sitting in a meeting with his people and somebody comes up with a great new idea, but there's some risk associated with it, that manager is more likely to think of how it might impact the quarterly reports down the road and decide against it. So,
and this is one of the interesting things to look at in changes in how NASA functions, because
right.
in
and
the
I was
early
just about
days,
to get to that.
yeah, we've gone from a NASA that ran like a .com startup to a NASA that runs like a megalo corporation.
Well, NASA really never did run like a .com startup. What happened was that NASA was a whole bunch of little organizations, relatively little organizations, laboratories and places like the Langley Research Center in Virginia and Edwards Air Force, well, the high-speed flight station at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and of course the Army Ballistic Missile Program in Alabama. Those all got integrated into one agency, and they never lost their rivalries. They never lost their different cultures. The only way that they really functioned as well as they did during Apollo was because there was a very strong managerial hand at the top in the person of George Miller, who was the head of manned spaceflight at NASA headquarters during Apollo, and another guy named General Sam Phillips, who came to NASA at George Miller's urging and brought to NASA the discipline called systems engineering, which had been developed in the Air Force Minuteman missile program. And it was because of the discipline that Phillips brought to NASA and systems engineering and the very strong oversight from headquarters that forced these disparate feudal fiefdoms to cooperate and work together, that Apollo was as successful as it was. Now, the other thing about Apollo was the goal was very clear, and it was a matter of national urgency. Once that all ended, several things happened. The political climate changed so that NASA's budget went down. That increased the level of competition and friction between the various NASA centers. At the same time, there was no clear mission to unite NASA or to build a political consensus. So from Apollo onward, NASA became driven more by political factors than it ever had been before. And as much as anything else, and I always hate to say this, but I really do think it's true, we've had a space program that's as much a jobs program as an exploration program since Apollo ended.
And it's a much less successful one than it used to be. Cassini used to be able to employ half of JPL, and now Mars Science Lander Curiosity is able to do much less.
Well, success is measured in different ways. I would say that they
as a jobs program.
Well, they, while the shuttle was flying, they kept thousands upon thousands of people busy, working to keep the shuttle flying. It was a very labor-intensive vehicle, but the success was in the face of some very non-optimum conditions. So, having said all of that, what really turns me on now is organizations like SpaceX, which of course was created by Elon Musk and just flew the third successful flight of their rocket, the Falcon 9, and the second successful flight of their capsule, the Dragon, and they did that to make the first cargo mission, commercial cargo mission, to the International Space Station. It went spectacularly well. It went better than anybody had a right to expect. And having interviewed Musk and his people and having spent a lot of time digging into the technology behind their rockets and spacecraft, I can tell you that they are doing something that nobody's ever done before, including NASA, which is that they've started with a blank sheet of paper and they've said, how can we optimize for reliability, ease of manufacture, and low cost? So, and safety. But it turns out that those things kind of go hand in hand. But nobody had ever done it because the thing that you have to do to make a space vehicle reliable, safe, and low cost is make it simple. And that is a very, very tall order. And that's what Musk and his people have spent the last 10 years doing, and they have been remarkably successful with NASA's help. I'm not for a minute trying to suggest that NASA was not absolutely crucial. They are, after all, building on half a century of NASA knowledge and experience. But to me, that's going back to Neil Stephenson's essay. You know, Elon Musk was a guy who grew up in South Africa, was impressed by the space program and turned on by it. When he was in college, that was one of the three things he said would improve humanity. The other two being energy and something to do, I guess he figured something to do with the internet. Well, he's been working on those other two things, and now he's trying to make us a multi-planet species.
And he's doing tremendous work. I'd like to pause for a minute, though, and do a station identification. If you're just turning in, you're watching the Weekly Science Hour. This is hosted by CosmoQuest. I'm Dr. Pamela Gay, and I and Emily Lakdawala of the Planetary Society host this every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. This week we're talking with Andrew Chaikin of andrewchaikin.com, science writer, science historian, science journalist, science communicator, I guess. And we're talking about the interplay between science, science fiction, and inspiration, and the big ideas for tomorrow. Elon Musk is slowly changing how manned spaceflight works. It's going to be interesting to see.
He's trying to.
There's
a lot of pushback from the old guard aerospace establishment, but I think he has a very good chance of pulling it off.
Now, as he's re-innovating how we get to space, do you think that this will have a positive effect on how we do science in space?
Yes.
Is it going to allow us to redirect more money from NASA to science, for instance?
What it does is it lowers the cost of access to Earth orbit, and if you can get into Earth orbit, you're halfway to anywhere in the solar system.
Yeah.
One of the things that drives up the cost of robotic missions to explore the solar system is the difficulty of building very complex spacecraft that are also small enough and lightweight enough to fit into the existing rockets. What Musk is trying to do is create a relatively low-cost, heavy lift booster in the near future called the Falcon Heavy. And one of the effects of that will be to not only lower the launch cost for a large spacecraft, but also to ease the pressure, the technological pressure, due to mass constraints. So you no longer have to build your spacecraft, with no margin of error if things get a little bit heavier than you thought they were. Now you'll have that extra amount of thrust from your launch vehicle, and you won't be paying an arm and a leg for that. So ultimately, I think it's going to be a very good thing, even for robotic exploration. And if you believe Musk, and I'm not saying that I always have an easy time believing every one of his predictions, but he says that he can take the Dragon capsule, which has currently only been flown unmanned, but he can stuff it with scientific instruments and go land it on Mars. Now, he can't do that with the Falcon Heavy. I'm not sure if he thinks he can do it with Falcon Heavy or not. But eventually, he may have created a way of delivering extremely large scientific payloads to places like the Moon and Mars.
And what's kind of awesome is because, as you said, he has this multi-dimensional way of looking at things from both the space exploration, the energy, and the computational side of things.
And the business side.
And the business side. One of the other things that we really struggle
like
with
Southwest
with
Airlines.
spacecraft. Yeah.
It's basically like that.
One of the things that we really struggle with in building spacecraft isn't just the mass, but the low energy constraints that we have. Some spacecraft are dealing with less electricity than my desk utilizes, the entire spacecraft. Right. And he's looking at that side of things as well. Now we have one question that I'd love to pose to you that's coming.
Nuclear power is a political issue, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but I'm saying we got to figure out ways to safely launch nuclear-powered spacecraft that can operate on much higher power budgets for much longer periods of time, like the Curiosity Mars rover that's on its way to Mars.
Now that actually bridges nicely to a question that we have from Tim Hem out in the audience. He's asking, if MSL results are consistent with life, would that direct more funds back to planetary sciences?
You know, it's really hard to call that one right now. If you had asked me that question a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, I would have said, yeah, that's really likely that that would be the case. But let me just tell you where we are right now. MSL, which is the Mars Science Laboratory, aka Curiosity, was a lot more expensive than anybody at NASA expected. The technology hurdles to create that rover, which is the size of an SUV and has incredible equipment on board, stuff that when I was a geology student you needed, you know, half of a laboratory to house, is now inside Curiosity and will be operated on the surface of Mars, please God, if the landing system works. But it was very expensive, and it was not the only NASA robotic mission that overran its budget by lots of money. The other one you probably know is the James Webb Space Telescope, which is a very large infrared telescope that's a sort of follow-up to the Hubble.
Different wavelengths. It will be completely different pretty pictures.
Different pretty pictures, but because it uses infrared, it can look farther, because when you get out to the very earliest galaxies, which are the farthest away from us, the velocity at which the universe is expanding when you get out that far and receding from us stretches the light into the infrared wavelength. So you need an infrared instrument at that point to even see this stuff. So
and you also need infrared to see planets, and so
you can do a lot of other cool things. You can peer into stellar nurseries like the Orion Nebula and look into the heart of places where stars are being born. You can see objects that are not stars like planets because of the much less intense heat that they give off in the infrared. So for a lot of reasons, the astronomical community has had a lot of their chips riding on JWST. The problem is that they've gone so far over budget, again because of technology problems, that they overspent themselves very early in the game, that the Office of Management and Budget has pushed back and has now said to NASA, you're not going to get these multi-billion-dollar missions anymore, because you can't do them on time and under budget.
Yeah.
There are a number of people who are trying to convince OMB that that is a very kind of misguided response to the problem, that it doesn't get us where we want to be as a country, that in fact there are ways to control the cost of missions, and there are reasons to keep doing big missions. And even aside from the really big missions, one of the other things that the budget cuts have now done is they've slowed down the pace of smaller missions. And it turns out that smaller missions are just as important because they answer questions that that you can't build a multi-billion-dollar mission all the time, and you've got to answer a whole bunch of questions, and you've also got to have, this is really important, you've got to have a pipeline of data to keep new scientists coming into the field. What we don't want to have happen is we don't want to have that pipeline choked off to the degree that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we don't have a planetary science community to speak of. That would be terrible.
This is a really important point that you're making. One of the things that as an astronomer I found kind of startling when I realized it is in the field of planetary science, the majority of researchers are what are called soft money researchers. These are people that live from research grant to research grant, and their money comes either directly from NASA to work on a specific research question, or it becomes via the mission that they're associated with. And often people are working with 5 or 6 different missions trying to make their ends meet. Now, when you're a mid-level, senior-level researcher and you see there's just not as much money around, the first thing you do is you reduce the number of graduate students you have working for you. You reduce the number of postdoctoral fellows. These are early career people who've just finished their PhDs that you have working for you. So now here you are, the senior level or mid-level person. I'm a mid-level person at this point in my career. And you're struggling to feed yourself, but you aren't feeding that younger generation.
Right.
And if we have all the mid-level and senior-level people in a I've got to protect what I'm doing mode instead of a I've got to raise up the next generation mode, there's going to be no next generation.
And, you know, you could be out there saying to yourself, well, you know, that's really unfortunate, but a lot of people are struggling. I would ask you to consider what we would be as a culture without new images from the surface of Mars, new images from orbit around Saturn and Jupiter, new information about possible places where life may exist beyond Earth, new information about solar systems beyond our sun, where we're learning that, you know, planets come in all shapes and sizes and varieties that we never even thought about.
And Kepler, which is the mission that you're talking about that's discovering planet after hundreds of planets, this is actually one of those mid-expense missions.
I mean, it's amazing what we can do for a lot less than several $billion dollars. And it's only going to get better as the technology improves, as launch costs come down, and so on and so forth. But I'm just saying and this brings us back to where we started, because Ray Bradbury was one of the most passionate advocates for exploration as something that we need to do as human beings. He said, you know, my favorite quote, which, you know, I have to say is from an essay that I commissioned for the magazine Space Illustrated back in 2000, and it was really a joy to work with Ray on that. But he wrote, you know, we have been given hands to touch the miraculous. We have been given hearts to know the incredible. Can we shrink back to bed in our funeral clothes? Mars says we cannot. And that is basically who we are as human beings. Yes, we are all of these other things that we do in our day-to-day lives, but we are also, in our DNA, we are also discoverers. And if we give that up, you know, we're really sowing the seeds of our own demise. Now, that's me talking, not Ray Bradbury at this point.
So with suborbital space flight and the new commercial space industry, one of the neat things that I've got to watch the past year is different programs that are helping to get kids using the low-cost sounding rockets, stratospheric balloons to start launching to the edge of outer space.
It's so cool. And every time I every time I see a new YouTube video of somebody that's launched a balloon to the edge of space, even if it's just for fun, I think, wow, you know, when I was a kid, that was something that only a handful of scientists got to do.
And so do you think now that we have commercial space flight starting to come in, that it will change the paradigm of who's generating the science, maybe taking it away from NASA somewhat?
Well, I don't know that it needs to be taking it. It's broadening it out. And I can tell you without a doubt that it is already changing. The suborbital spaceflight capability that Richard Branson and others are developing is already being harnessed by scientists like Alan Stern at Southwest Research Institute in Boulder to do solar system and exploration and astronomical data gathering from these suborbital missions. Now, the other thing I can tell you is that there are also private solar system exploration missions in the works. So we are seeing, that's why I say don't fall in love with one narrative, because you really cannot predict what is coming down the pike. It is so remarkable, the rate of change, and I think we have to just be out there saying, yes, this is a good thing, this is good for us, and it's great for our kids, and who knows what it's going to mean for their kids and their grandkids.
So to pause for another station identification, this is the Weekly Science Hour. I'm Dr. Pamela Gay. I host this event every other week. The weeks that I'm not here, Emily Laktawalla from the Planetary Society blog hosts. And all of this is put together by CosmoQuest. If you want to find out when we're going to have additional Google Hangouts on air and all the other different events that we're doing, sign up for an account at cosmoquest.org. We have a weekly newsletter that will alert you to all the different events that we're doing. We also post things on our Twitter feed and on our Google Plus feed. So circle us on Google Plus, follow us on Twitter as CosmoQuestX, and you can stay up to date with everything we're doing. This week I'm talking with Andrew Chaikin, who you can find online at andrewchaikin.com. That's CHAIKIN. And we're starting to run out of time. And if any of you out there in the listening audience have any questions, please feel free to type them in, and we'll work to answer them as we can. Now one of the things that looking back over history, the point that you made that it seems like Kennedy somehow stole a decade out of the 21st century, it is so amazingly true. And when you said that, it was this clarifying moment for me. Because we've gone from all the way to the moon, back to low Earth orbit, and now we're re-exploring suborbital spaceflight again.
Yeah.
But the storyline has changed.
The way I feel about it is that the timeline has been put into an iPod shuffle.
It has.
Yeah.
But the thing is, now it's the barnstorming of suborbital spaceflight. It's
Right.
every man exploring low Earth.
The difference is that this time it's personal, right?
Yeah.
This is not about governments saying we're going to do this because nobody else can do this. This is about people who were so turned on by it the first time that they just won't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
And that's true.
They're building their rocket car future.
Right. I mean, where are the flying cars? You know, I was at the World's Fair in 1964. I saw the picture phones. I sound like Terry Garr now from Tootsie. You know, we've got very little of what was promised to us for the 21st century, but what we do have that we never could have imagined was this information technology and this interconnectedness and this incredible, you know, ever morphing, you know, situation that we're in. And I think that we're finally starting to see the logjam breaking up on the technology of spaceflight. And it, you know, all I can say is just look out, because it is going to get more and more cool from here on in.
So we have Robert Bridge asking, can you say a little bit more about private exploration projects? So I guess my favorite personally is the Blue Origin with their happy little rocket that goes up, goes over, comes back down, and lands on its butt again.
Right.
It's awesome.
Right.
It has wings that look upside down because they're needed for the landing part, not the takeoff part. What's your favorite part of how they're innovating space exploration?
I just love innovation. So if I hear about innovation in the human spaceflight side, or if I hear about innovation in robotic or even ground-based astronomy where they're learning how to take pictures as sharp as Hubble using corrective adaptive optics, I just love seeing people, you know, solve these problems. As far as private missions, the question about private missions, I actually am not at liberty to elaborate on the private missions that I know about. I can only tell you that they are in the works as far as robotic exploration missions or even human exploration missions. But the energy is there, and there is just so much innovation going on. I mean, I sat next to one of the head guys at Sierra Nevada Corporation, which is another one of these commercial companies that's trying to build a vehicle first for suborbital and then orbital flight. And they're basically taking a design that began with a little Soviet mini shuttle and then was expanded slightly by NASA, but never really developed any further. And they're turning it into a vehicle that can potentially do all kinds of missions in low Earth orbit and become a kind of a space taxi in a way that we used to, again, talk about in the old science fiction movies. I mean, that's my really, I got to say, Pamela, that's my terrain. I'm not a science fiction reader, but I love all the old movies, you know, going way back to Destination Moon and Rocket Ship XM and, you know, Conquest of Space and, of course, 2001. And there was something implicit in all of those movies, which was, this is going to be no big deal. Yeah. We are going to be doing this like walking down the street. And it's been a long wait, but I finally, for the first time in my 56th year, feel hopeful that I'm actually going to get to live to see some of that.
And what's awesome with the commercial space industry coming into play is you do have all these different companies who often with some amount of NASA seed money, with a whole lot of creativity and engineering, are working to define that rocket car future, and they don't have to wait for anything other than, if we want to do more deep space exploration, the one piece that we're missing that the government has to do is the production of plutonium for radiothermal generators. But other than
as far as we know,
that's the only piece we're missing.
Well, in the current way that we think about providing energy in deep space, it is. But, you know, Neil Stephenson pointed out in his piece that, you know, there have been ideas sitting around since the 60s of firing lasers at the bottom of a vehicle which has a supply of hydrogen in its base and flash igniting that hydrogen to much greater energy levels than you could ever get with a chemical rocket. And your energy source is not on the vehicle, it's on the ground, so you're not carrying all that production with you. And yet, where have we gone with ideas like that? I mean, part of the challenge here is to remind ourselves to think outside the box. And there are always going to be plenty of people that want to do that. The problem is kind of getting the resources to turn those ideas into, you know, working prototypes.
So Hannah Tankery is asking, what do you think NASA's role in the future is going to be as things are changing?
Well, I actually think that NASA is doing a really good job right now of partnering with the commercial companies. NASA is a little bit fractured lately, not entirely its own fault, because the Congress has been pushing on it to build this space launch system, which is really, to me, kind of the poster child for the old way of doing things, the pork barrel space program. Yeah. But NASA has also been very, very aggressive with the commercial side and trying to remove barriers using things like the Commercial Space Act, which is a very much more efficient way for them to partner with companies like SpaceX and Sierra Nevada and even Boeing and so forth. And I think if they can keep that up, if they can at least keep a major part of themselves in the game of fostering new innovation and new ways of doing things, then I think we'll be on the right track. And of course, NASA has always been the cutting edge for technology development. So, you know, the private missions that I'm talking about, you know, many of them are using NASA equipment, NASA technology. SpaceX is developed using the experience that NASA had and going it one better. So NASA can play an absolutely wonderful role in being the cutting-edge technology driver and at the same time fostering collaboration with private entities to turn that technology into something that can be kind of universalized.
And I think we live in a really awesome time to get to see all of these different partnerships maturing, and I just love all the different things that we can follow today. We have Blue Origins that is working on its rockets. We have Sierra Nevada that's working to do both suborbital and eventually orbital space planes. We have Virgin Galactic with commercial space flight. We have SpaceX with orbital and hopefully interplanetary space flight.
And orbital sciences, while you're mentioning orbital. But, you know, again,
yeah.
As I said, with problems with the planetary exploration budget, and we need activism on the part of the space community to push back against those budget cuts because they will impact us for years to come.
Yeah.
We also need activism. We need everybody who cares about space to, you know, say that this commercial stuff is a good thing.
Yes. And
to push back against the old guard that really doesn't want to see these changes happen.
Yeah. So we need to encourage people to dream big, to encourage the barnstorming of suborbital spaceflight to continue, but to also encourage Congress to say, look, science comes from NASA. We need that science budget to raise up that next generation of people who will build the scientific dreams,
That's
that
right.
will build the next Spirit and Opie that'll go wandering all over a distant planet and sending us back fabulous data and images. So what parting words do you have for our audience?
Keep your fingers crossed for Curiosity's landing on August 5th. That would be my first thought.
Yes.
Feel free to communicate with me through my website, andrewchaikin.com. I have lots of stuff that I've written about space, would love to share with you. And let your voices be heard if you care about space, because, you know, in this day and age, there's so much going on out there to distract us, and rightfully so. But, you know, we have to let our friends and our family know that this is not a luxury, that it's something that we need, even in these difficult economic times.
And as all these commercial agencies are coming into place, NASA's the one that's there that is helping to lay down the charters for how do you explore the moon.
Absolutely.
That's defining the safety regulations. They're becoming the new FAA.
I want to see a healthy, vibrant NASA that's pushing back the limits of the frontier and making it possible for us to see farther than we've ever seen before, but at the same time for more of us to go into space than we've ever seen before, and to truly become a spacefaring species. My parting words tonight, my bumper sticker for NASA would be three things. Help make humanity a spacefaring species, discover the mysteries of the universe, and improve life on Earth in the process.
That's a wonderful sentiment. And if you, the audience, would like to help get involved with exploring the solar system today, get involved at cosmoquest.org. We're a citizen science community that helps you become part of NASA doing science today. And this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation, and I look forward to having you back on the show in the future. And everyone, go get involved on his website, get involved at cosmoquest.org, and remember, the universe really is yours to discover. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you, Pamela.
Bye-bye.